Hello everyone, this is Menz here. I'm going to be going over this map strategy for the new rework on Fjords that came in World of Tanks 1.0. Wargaming reworked a pretty large area on this map to where it still looks like the Fjords that everyone knows. However, more or less, a lot of the map has changed, especially in the center of the map, to whereas it's still going to play somewhat similar, where the flanks are kind of still the same. They are going to work out a little bit differently, and the positions and differently the routes that you're going to take are just slightly changed for the better, hopefully. But I have a full written map strategy over on my website, watkuru.com. There's a link in the video description below, and also it's going to pop up at the end of the video if you want a fully written guide, a little bit more in-depth details, and basically breaking down every nook and cranny. More or less, though, bringing up what's in that guide, kind of my Photoshop strategy here. Looking at Fjords, I broke it down into three different flanks. You have the infamous waterfall, basically in the northeast of the map. I just kept it to the ABC lines. You have the center field, the DE and F lines, more or less. And then you have the town, the G through K lines at the bottom. So, with the teams being situated yellow on the western side of the map, blue on the eastern side of the map, the map largely splitting, basically top to bottom with three flanks, more or less, to where they kind of, especially the center field, is a little bit less cut and dry as it only being like one flank. But more or less, I think keeping it pretty simple and short and sweet here makes things the easiest for tackling Fjords. Now, on the left side, you'll see kind of like a little cheat sheet, for different types of tanks where you probably should head in them. It's not like the end-all be-all of guides, but more or less how they break down is starting, first thing listed usually is like the best flank you can kind of go to in that tank, and then ending with kind of the worst flank. So more or less, lights, you're kind of looking at going to like the waterfall flank potentially, or the center field from either team. Mediums, kind of the same, but the center field's a little bit more important in a medium for most tanks. It depends on the tier, all different kinds of things with matchmaking and stuff. Super heavy tanks, you probably should stick towards the bottom part of the map, the town or the center field, the town being slightly better option. Standard heavy tanks, so say a little bit more mobility, say like at high tiers, like a T110E5 would be a heavy tank, type 5 heavy, super heavy tank. Center field works, the town works, waterfall even works for like a all-around heavy tank. A TD, with kind of a good gun but no armor to speak of. Center field's your best bet. Waterfall and the town work as well. And then armored TD, town, then the center field, and the waterfall. But anyway, looking at the map strategy here, you'll notice that basically starting from the blue team, I'll start there. There aren't much changes where your base is in the same spot. The layout of the map's largely the same, to where if you're sending people up to the waterfall, it's a pretty steep climb to where it's going to take you quite a bit to get up there. Pushing into the town, that's really close to where you spawn, and near your base, that's where most of your heavy, hard-hitting stuff will set up. You have a peninsula beneath the base for kind of tank destroyers, and at most 2 tanks probably to set up down there. You don't want to put too many there to kind of help with the choke point beneath the town. And then you have the center area where there's a kind of a watch out point in E8 for the blue side and E7 that you can kind of shoot into the center field. You can shoot south, you can shoot up the F line. There's a lot of different options to shoot from there. That's a slightly more flexible spot for tank destroyers than sitting on the peninsula beneath the base. But most importantly, from the blue side and even the yellow side, is the reworked kind of center hill that's located just beneath the center field. That's in E5 and E6. So that provides you vision, you know, for a huge part of this map, all the way leading north and all the way more or less pointing to the southern choke point too. Coming from the yellow side, more or less you have a similar kind of like TD spot in the center field. That's in C4 area. Going to the waterfall again, that's like the longest route for your tanks to get to. So stuff like super heavies, you know, slow tanks don't necessarily want to push, you know, into the A and B lines. It takes you a while to get there. Lights, mediums, fast heavies. And then finally the southern town flank. I know it's not technically a town from the yellow side, but pushing down into like J4, J5, it eventually leads to the town if you push through there. But that checkpoint, you know, heavy armor, big guns usually works the best down there. Anyway, getting to the map itself here, starting again from the blue side here, more or less your team's going to spawn right near the base. So you have a few options right off the bat to where, if you knew Fjords before the rework, most everything in this area is the same, to where you can set up on this little peninsula here, specifically in this area, to take shots onto the choke point. Again, 1-2 tanks max. If you put too many people here, you know, you're going to be hurting your team because they're not going to be able to hold the rest of the map, and then the enemy's just going to push in and kill you. So what's the point? Anyway, though, one spot that has been reworked quite a bit is towards the center here, to where the choke point's largely the same, to where, you know, more or less you're going to set up in this area. There's a rock here you can kind of side scrape against here, but they've changed a few buildings in the town to where more or less it is a little bit more viable, I found, to, if you're in like a TD with armor, or if you're in like a slow heavy and you don't want to go down here, you can kind of leapfrog off the edges of the buildings, take shots into the center if need be. But coming from this side is basically this little overwatch point to where you can't get past this. However, you can set up, and it's elevated here, to where while your shots aren't the best, if you're in like a tall TD setting up here, you might get shots into the south. If you're in lower tier matches, you probably won't be able to get shots, but more or less your shots here are going to allow you to sport the center field. You can take shots here, albeit if someone's up here from the enemy team, you will get spotted unless you're kind of hunkered on, in the back here behind all these bushes. And you can shoot down here because this is a little bit more traveled in the reworked Fjords. Alternatively, if you do decide, let's zoom up here quickly, to make the huge trek up to the waterfall area, things, you know, mostly are the same here, to where they've removed a little bit of cover just in this general area, but there's a couple little hills to work off of. But more or less this plays very similar, to where your team can kind of decide to hold up and defend, whether you put some people here and here and let the enemy push in and then kind of pincer them, or if you decide to inch up a little bit more, to where you do have to beware, you know, enemies will shoot you from here, and there's some trees here, so you might not spot someone right away, to where you're very vulnerable here. But if you have the numbers trying to push to where you take out all those tank destroyers, and eventually you can push through to where you have a decision to go this way, set up on this little ridge here and deal with anybody this way, or like usual push through. You have some options available to you. Now, before I tackle the major change to the center here, I'm going to go to this other side, to where not too many changes from this side of Fjords from this team, to where usually you're spawning in this area, to where, you know, mediums and lights and stuff, you can push up to the waterfall, to where basically two options. I would go here, to where you can take the slightly safer approach if you're in like a heavy, or if you're in a light or a medium, you can push up through this little gully here, to where if you do need to stop, you can get some shots this way, and you also can shoot this way from here if you have a little bit of gun depression. But more or less pushing through here is a very wise choice to push this hard, because if you do get tanks over here, you can easily, you know, shoot enemies this way. But more importantly, it gives you a little bit more options, to where there is this path here, to where you kind of can set up to take enemies out here. Say if you have some gun depression, some turret armor and stuff, Or, you know, there's also this little hill here where you can kind of do the same thing, or if you don't have gun depression, you can kind of side scrape off of this and shoot this way. But anyway, the southern side from this side plays out largely the same, where there's a slightly lower path here to get through this area without getting shot. But heading up here to the choke point, you decide either to defend, whether you kind of defend a little bit further back here, let the enemy come around to where you already can hit them, or if you decide to kind of push here, you can hold down back here, or, you know, kind of push up and brawl. It's just this side that a lot of people fail to realize when they're playing Fjords is pushing this flank from, you know, the left side here. Let me bring up the map again. So pushing that flank down there from the yellow side against the blue side. The blue side has a slightly massive advantage in my opinion, because the blue side can either push aggressively if they want to, you know, if they have the advantage, whether it's numbers or they get some early kills in, or the blue side can kind of backtrack and pull you further north. So specifically, you're looking at that peninsula that the blue team has beneath its base, and also the amount of tanks that it's going to have around the town, being that you're on their side of the map. So more or less, looking at this choke point again, if you find yourself on the yellow team and there's a lot of tanks left or a lot of TDs and stuff, and you have to push here, you got to really keep in mind that once you kind of get out here, you're going to start getting blasted from the peninsula, depending on if they have some TDs really high up here, and say if you're not in like really low tier small tanks, because they kind of have trouble shooting over this sometimes. The shots are very limited, if not impossible sometimes, but they are there. Basically, you're going to be getting shot by not only tanks in this area, but from the peninsula, from the center, arty. So it's something to where trying to push through here sometimes is really difficult. You're better off slightly taking the lower approach, because then you take that position out of the mix to where you mainly worry about tanks near you and through this gap here, to where once you get into these buildings you're a little safer. But you're safer taking the lower approach than the higher approach, because you're still going to get hit from the center, and then once you start getting here, you're going to get kind of pushed on from the north. All right, so one area that has changed quite a bit on Fjords is the center kind of hill here, just beneath the field. So coming from this side, you know, you have this kind of direct path to where you can push through here very quick if you're in a fast tank, or you can take the slightly longer approach, which is a little bit vulnerable, but most tanks, as long as you're not in like a really slow heavy tank or TD, can make it through this path early on. So coming from the other side, you kind of have the same choice, to where coming from this side, you can kind of push this way, but you can also push down here if you want to make sure your team takes this. However, you know, more or less your path around here isn't safe at all. You're just going to die. But the main change they did is to this little hill that you can now access, and it's not like a secret climbing spot or something. So pushing from what was the blue side over here, you kind of have a slightly easier path, but that depends on how the enemy team sets up, to where trying to push through here, like heavy tanks can fight here, heavily armored TDs and stuff, to where if the enemies are set up here, trying to push here early on will probably get you killed, to where getting up here is a pretty huge tactical advantage for your team. However, at the same time, you know, you're able to push in here, but you're not able to actually get all the way up on the hill here, because if you're looking at where the enemy is going to kind of be advancing from and where all their TDs are going to set up here, you'll notice no cover, and you're going to try to go up here, you're just going to die. So that's one thing to where this side looks like it has a slight advantage with getting here, but at the same time, there's not much cover for you to actually get up there. So if you do make it in the beginning, the enemy team just, for lack of better words, sucks. But more or less, Pushing from this side, you can kind of push down here, which is slightly safer, or in my opinion, play it a little slower, whether you set up here, behind this building, so on and so forth, or say even further down here, because the enemy can push from this side and that way, but trying to get to this area, you're going to have support behind you to where if the enemies do push in, they'll take damage, you'll know they're coming, and you also can try to fight, up here. It does depend on how many tanks you have to get actually get there. You don't want to say go alone, because the enemy can just push in, go down here and kill you. So it's definitely risky, but the center is a little bit more open now, which if you're coming from this side, you're probably going to have support here, and more or less you usually have like a tank here, to where depending on where you actually want to push through from where you spawn, this route's probably the safer route, to where you either can set up like on this corner to basically maybe peek, light up people for your TDs back here to shoot at, try to bait some enemies around, stuff like that. Or you can try to fight through this path, but once you're starting to push through here, there's a lot of enemies in the town. They're going to be set up on this road to where they're pretty much going to light you up, to where the alternate path, trying to push through here, you can push down this early on relatively safely, and you're going to try to set up in this position and hope that your team has some people supporting you back here and also back here, to where you can kind of poke out, try to shoot people in the town, and hopefully if your team's able to get someone in here, because this is a harder approach from this side, given that the path is not pointed towards you. Your tanks have to come right back around, turn around, and get here. However, there's cover from this side, so once you get up here past people shooting you here, there's actual cover for you to work off of, and more importantly, you can shoot up into the waterfall, you can spot people from here, you can shoot into the town. There's a lot of advantages for basically the yellow team on Fjords here, what I had on this map strategy for the yellow team to try to get up here. However, do note it is difficult for you to do that, to where you can try it really early, but once people kind of catch on to where this route is, it's almost always going to be contested and people are going to watch it. So it's something to, if it's there in the beginning and you think you can do it, might be a risk from the yellow side, but it's worth taking from the yellow side. However, from the blue team, I wouldn't risk trying to push up here, because there's no cover on that ridge to where most enemies are going to be kind of set up and camping. Anyway, though, as far as Fjords, the map itself, with artillery, kind of glancing over arty, most arty from this team wants to set up over here or a little bit in the north, so you can shoot down into the choke point. You can also set up around this kind of U-boat here, to where you can get shots into the center, but really those shots are really situational, and if your team kind of loses this, you're gonna die pretty fast. The southern team, arty spots are mainly the same, to where you spawn around the base, kind of set up near the base, maybe on the peninsula. You can set up here a little bit further north of the base, and that can give you some shots into this choke point a little bit further back. I wouldn't really recommend going to the waterfall like some people might try in like a really fast arty, because your shots are extremely limited. Like, you might be able to hit into the center, but at that point, it took you like over a minute to get up there in an SPG. But the main changes of Fjords come with this center flank, to where it's really hard to say how it's actually going to work match to match, just because they reworked this center to where this is very important. However, this area is a little bit more accessible for either team to push in, whether it's here or pushing in from this side, setting up here. And then you have basically these two routes available to both teams, whether coming from the blue side, you're pushing up, take this, you can advance up here somewhat safely, or blue side again, trying to advance up here, and trying to cut off the waterfall if you have a team, you know, pushing from the north as well. Or from the yellow side, you know, advancing up here, pretty safe. However, you can also advance up here because there are some trees, a couple rocks for you to use, and even this little, you know, ridge here to kind of fight. So there's a lot more options available for Fjords, to where my fully written map strategy goes into a little bit more in depth into each position and route and stuff. But basically, it's the Fjords that everyone knows, as far as the southern town flank with that choke point, the northern waterfall flank with the choke point. The main change is basically right in the center here, to where this center watchtower overlook hill, you know, it's a water tower technically. That's going to be very interesting, but early in the game, unless your team screws up, it should be very hard for either side to get to it. But definitely trying to contest this if your team looks like it's not going to, whether it's just setting up and trying to prevent any enemies from getting up there. So wise move, because once you do get someone up there, you can spot and control a lot of the map, and things can get really lopsided in your team's favor if your team has it, if you have someone up there. However, trying to put too many tanks there early, you're just going to be a sitting duck. It's really just like a spot to amplify all the other tanks that are kind of around the center of the map. Anyway, thanks again for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Again, I have a full written map strategy for Fjords here over on my website, wakuru.com. Check it out. There's a link in the video description. Also, one's probably popping up here at any second now, just to pop over there. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed. You know, I try not to make these too long, but it's a little hard to go over every flank. So hopefully you enjoyed this 20-minute kind of simple breakdown, even not too simple though, of Fjords. So thanks again for watching. Have a very nice day. See you guys around.